Hello everyone, this is Super Spiky Shell. So far, I made 3 videos in the last month of 2025. My first one being a prediction on Super Mario Galaxy 3, and my next 2 about my opinions on Super Mario 64, by ranking every single course and doing an official game review. And so far, by YouTube beginner standards, I think I'm off to a decent start. But now it's 2026 and I have several more videos to make. And for this one, I'm gonna do what I have long waited for, and that's rank all 96 tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And as of right now, it's been my most played Nintendo Switch game with over 900 hours poured into it, and has been one of the best Mario Kart games, partly due to this Booster Course Pass DLC. While I don't think it's as amazing as most people say it is, I do love it for having the most tracks in any console game, having an amazing character roster, and the best battle mode in the series. However, there are a few reasons why this isn't my favorite Mario Kart game. One of them is because Mario Kart World exists and is better, with more technical gameplay mechanics and open world experience. 8 Deluxe has far more shallow gameplay, more unsatisfying difficulty, some inconsistent track quality, and almost no unlockables, which have kept me from coming back to this game as much now that World is out. I only came back to this game recently just to make videos about it, and for no other particular reason, because even though it's not my favorite anymore, I still have some videos that I really want to make on it. And it's not just this game. I will also make videos on Mario Kart World as well as other entries when I get a chance. But that's enough rambling, because right now I'm gonna rank all 96 tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe based on their quality and my enjoyment out of them, and I will once again use a tier list. Also, these are based off my own opinion, and some of these are going to be unpopular choices, meaning they're controversial opinions of mine, and will be considered hot takes, which a lot of my videos will have. I think my Super Mario 64 course ranking had some too. But before I start ranking, be sure to subscribe to my channel and like the video, as it supports me and encourages me to make more content. Without further ado, let's get started. And to start off, we have the F tier. These are tracks that I consider to be the most unenjoyable in this game with the fewest redeeming qualities. And so far, there are only 2 tracks in 8 Deluxe that I consider awful. And one of them is SNES Mario Circuit 3, which is number 96 on my list. This track is disgusting. By far one of the worst tracks in the Mario Kart series, and one of my least favorite Super Mario Kart tracks, along with Choco Island 2 and Bowser's Castle 2. The layout is way too basic and cookie cutter, and is entirely symmetrical. It tries to be interesting with the different turns and shortcuts, but they don't help it stick out in the slightest. The only standout point is the 180-degree turn in the middle, but otherwise it's a very boring track, and goes on far too long. And as a remake, it's vastly unchanged. And while it doesn't look as bad on weaker hardware, it looks incredibly putrid in a HD platform. You know, a game that remodels tracks from the ground up? Yeah, this track is almost entirely same as the original, and looks awful here. They added some foreground details, but otherwise, the background is just nothing but flat grass and hills for miles. The Booster Course Pass has a lot of notoriety for its cheap, rushed, cartoony graphics, but this is a rock bottom low. At least the other bad-looking tracks look better because they're at least 3D modeled, and even though their textures don't look realistic, they're shaped as if they are, making this track bad-looking even by the DLC standards. They couldn't even give it a remix. Also, Mario Kart World has this and fully remade it, by giving it a background, adding half pipes, and remixing its music. That version made me tolerate this abomination of a track. Plus, you don't get 3 laps of it because it's combined with the other 2, so for once it doesn't overstay its welcome. Not only is this track awful, but was already being made in the next Mario Kart, making this an even worse choice for the Booster Course Pass. We should have had Mario Circuit 4 instead, let alone a full revamp like Bowser's Castle 3 had. This track doesn't deserve to be here. It's disgrace to Mario Kart Deluxe. I hate it, and every time it's picked, I can't wait till it's over. And barely missing out in last place, we have Excitebike Arena. This track is just an overglorified oval and a bunch of jumps to trick off of. And while it's a cool concept on paper representing a dirt bike stadium, other tracks did this better. In this track, almost every jump is the same, and it gets so redundant because you're not doing much more than that. Even the several randomized layouts don't help because they're just the same jumps in different spots. There's also two 180-degree turns, but those don't make it better. The music is interesting, but otherwise, the track is as boring as hell. And what's it called? Excitebike Arena? And it's what, the second slot of Egg Cup? Yeah, in the Wii U DLC pack, they decided to have the first two tracks in each cup be retros, third slot be a regular nitro, and the final track be a crossover track to a different Nintendo franchise, such as Zelda, Animal Crossing, and F-Zero, all of which were great. But then one of the cups decided to break that trend and sacrifice a retro for another crossover nitro, and it wasn't even a good choice. Excitebike on the NES is one of Nintendo's most forgettable series, and if this track wasn't made, no one would ever bring that game up. They gave up a retro for a lackluster crossover track, and it's painfully boring and uninspired, which makes it an incompetent choice. And while it's more interesting than friggin' SNES Mario Circuit 3, it still deserves to be F tier. And that's it for the F tier. The only tracks in this game that are entirely awful. However, we still have the more generally bad ones to go, with the D- tier being next. Now, these tracks are still painfully unenjoyable, but they're at least more redeemable than the F ones, and are more plain bad than awful. And to start off, we have Toad Circuit. By default, this isn't a bad track because it's a slightly more interesting layout than some other introductory tracks, and has a cool paraglider section that can't be used in Lap 1, and I like the Toad balloons that give this track a bit of personality. In Mario Kart 7, it's an okay track. But in this game, yeah, what the hell happened to it? First of all, the music is butchered. The original one has a more energetic vibe to it, but this remix sucked it all out. And the grass textures look ugly. Not only are they incredibly smooth and cartoony, making it look so cheap, but the color itself is worse. Why is this grass a yellowish green? This isn't a desert track. At least it's 3D modeled, just like any ordinary track that would be in this game and most older platforms. I cannot say the same about SNES Mario Circuit 3, but I'll take Toad Circuit over that monstrosity, even if it's still an awful remake. At least it isn't that bad as a track in general. And most people don't like this track in 8 Deluxe, so this won't be controversial. My next choice, on the other hand, is gonna raise a bunch of pitchforks. But my next worst track is Grumble Volcano. I can't bring myself to love this track. I know it's one of the fan favorites, but I found this to be the most overrated track in Mario Kart Deluxe. I am for the atmosphere being an epic and dangerous lava theme, and I would love the idea of obstacles coming at you and crumbling terrain with epic music that reminds you you're in for a dangerous ride. And while I really like the music, that's all I can praise it for. As for the difficulty, it's way too brutal and unfair. I have no way of knowing when these meteors are gonna come right into my face until I almost hit one. And they just keep throwing other hazards in front of me. And the terrain is designed with little room to dodge them. I used to think this was a skill issue, because no matter how many times I play this track, I can't seem to get better. But looking back now, it's definitely not a skill issue. The difficulty is luck-based, and the stakes are higher than most difficult tracks, which are more constructive and manageable. Even non-stop chaos tracks or ones with non-hand-holding difficulty. But this track is just cruel. Even as someone who loves some of the hardest tracks in the series, this is too much of a good thing. And closing up the D- tier, we have Water Park. This one needs no introduction. It's supposed to be a water park with a bunch of water slides to ride and go down, and capture the essence of being one, but it does the absolute bare minimum by only giving one ride, which is just an overglorified anti-gravity loop. And then they tease you with a bunch of other rides you'll never get to. It's incredibly weak sauce, and is one of the most forgettable tracks in not just this game, but the whole series. And now we have the last bad tier, and that is the D+ tier. Now, these tracks I hesitate to say are bad, but they're still below average. Once again, very few tracks in this category, just like the D- and F ones. Yeah, I didn't find many tracks in 8 Deluxe to be functionally bad, but there are still a few more to touch upon. For starters, Toad's Turnpike. This track is just an 8 shape with almost nothing to make it stand out. A lackluster concept that is aged like milk. While it's kind of interesting to dodge a bunch of cars and trucks, there are plenty of other tracks that make better use of this traffic gimmick. This is just a simple road, with a couple of split paths and some vehicles to trick off, but otherwise, it's another forgettable track. It's boring and soulless. At number 90, we have Ice Ice Outpost. I used to love this track for its interesting concept of having 2 separate lanes to switch between repeatedly, but it vastly shrunk on me in no time. And while the music is great and the shortcuts are interesting, it's an incredibly boring and wasted track. There's no substance in Ice Ice Outpost. The 2 lanes don't do anything to make it interesting. They could have done so much more with this iceberg theme, but all they did was this. It's once again a forgettable track. And you know what else is forgettable? The worst city track in Mario Kart, which is Tokyo Blur. This is another track that shrunk on me as time went by. I used to think this was interesting for its arrow gimmick, and while Paris Promenade introduced it, this was the first time they really took you on different areas each lap. The problem is that other cities did this better, with different areas making different uses of landmarks and elements to make each lap distinguishable, and they had more personality. What does Tokyo Blur have? Just a bunch of roads, similar to a circuit, with a few thwomps and a random highway. And otherwise, you just drive past buildings. At least the music is interesting, but otherwise, it's an almost nothing track. It took other city tracks to realize why this one is weak sauce. At least it's not offensive like Toad Circuit, or more importantly, Mario Circuit 3. If anything, it's just a literal blur. Okay, now we're done with the bad tracks, and we can move on to the middle of the road ones. For the C- tier, we have tracks that are 100% mid in my opinion and are otherwise just mediocre. And to start off, we have GCN Baby Park. This is one of the most divisive tracks in Mario Kart history. It's a simple 7-lap loop with anti-gravity added to this remake, but there's tons of chaos provided by other players and items. Some people love it for its chaotic nature of feeling like a merry-go-round, and some hate it for being too much of a mess. I used to hate this track, and for a long time this would have been on the bottom of my list in the F tier, but then it grew on me a bit. As it turns out, it's supposed to be this chaotic because it makes you feel like you're on an actual ride, with an addition of other ones in the background you won't go to. But otherwise, it can sometimes be too much chaos. However, without items or other players, it can be a bit boring. Also, 7 laps can be redundant, but it also goes by very quick. I do accept this remake for adding anti-gravity because that makes it more well-paced and gives it more personality, but I can't rank it higher. As much as I respect this track now, it can still be a chaotic mess, and that's probably because of this game's item distribution, never mind item selection. I can appreciate chaotic situations even provided by other players, but having it for an entire track can be too much. Overall, I can't be nicer than to give it a low C-. This next one I also had mixed feelings about. I never considered Paris Promenade to be that good of a city track. It has less road and routes than any other city. That it's the only one that doesn't do a lap change each lap. I mean, laps 1 and 2 are the same, and lap 3 takes you on a new path before doing the whole thing backwards. Then I looked back and I can see why. It has more personality than some other city tracks, as it captures the essence of being in Paris, and is a decent introduction to the arrow gimmick, something Tokyo Blur didn't put the time and effort into. And I guess it works better as a regular track than a city one. By itself, it would be higher in the C+ or B-. But there is one attribute that put it so low here. That gosh awful music. Oh my, does it sound horrible. By far the worst music in any Mario Kart game I ever heard. It's supposed to feel like Paris with the French accordions, but it flows unnaturally and doesn't sound Mario Kart-ish, and is otherwise generally annoying and gets redundant. It's basically nails piercing my eardrums, and does keep me from wanting to choose or play this track. However, I can't let that bias overtake everything if there's nothing else wrong with it. It's not that interesting of a city track, but I personally had mixed feelings about it. However, I respect everything about it except the bad remix. Next up on this list, we have GBA Mario Circuit. Now this one isn't that interesting, it's a regular racetrack with a bland forest setting, and that's what it was like in the original. but this remake added something interesting. There's this giant anti-gravity ramp to loop around, and that doesn't do much to stick out. But it's something notable about it. Otherwise, it's not very good or memorable, and can get boring fast. Also, that remix isn't very good, as it's too low-pitched and contains mostly sound effects. But it's way better than Paris Promenade's air-grade music. And our last mediocre track is SNES Donut Plains 3. This is another improved remake that doesn't do enough to be special. It's just your obligatory World 1 theme, and while it sticks out more than the original Donut Plains 3, it's not enough. But they did add some interesting track elements such as the underwater sections, bridge to jump off of, and Monty Mo's digging around. There's just one more problem. The last turn is way too sharp for this game's controls. It was much more doable on Super Mario Kart with its slippery controls, but the more refined controls here make it too hard. And while the music is better, it's still nothing interesting. Overall, still mediocre track. At least it's some sort of revamp, unlike this piece of shit Mario Circuit 3. Next up is the C+ tier. These are tracks that I consider to be just okay. I don't necessarily like them, nor do I consider them good, but they're passable. And to start off the okay tracks, we have Mario Kart Stadium. As an introductory circuit, it does a good job introducing you to the game's mechanics, and isn't too uninspired or boring. As a track, it is nothing special, as it's just a big loop over a stadium, and it's in no way the most memorable track, but it's acceptable for what it is, even if Mario Kart World's introductory track is still better. Daisy Circuit is one of the worst choices for a curveball track, even 2 years after my recency bias. It's an okay track by default, just a simple circuit around a tiny harbor town with the sunset and atmosphere and some of Daisy's personality, but its atmosphere doesn't fully appeal to me. But even without that bias, it's a simple circuit pretending to be something else, and there's not much of anything. This particular version flows unnaturally with the nerfed Sunset and Toned Down remix, but the original one, which had it stronger, didn't have any track elements, which made this one stick out more. It evens out. The only truly notable thing is the stairway shortcut. And while it's an acceptable track, it did not deserve to be in a Deluxe. And I'm not saying that because we didn't get Airship Fortress, Mario Kart World has it now, but there were other choices such as GBA Lakeside Park, Wii Dry Dry Ruins, maybe even just give us Piranha Plant Pipeline and have Rosalina's Ice World replace the last GCN track in the original data mine. Also, it's too simple to be in Wave 6, so thanks but no thanks. Moo Moo Meadows is a fine track. It's a simple loop around a farm and has some nice pleasant vibes, and some interesting elements such as the cows blocking the track and the final stretch with the paraglider section, regular jump, and Monty Moles digging up the track. Unfortunately, it's nothing more and not special in any way. It's visually better than the original Wii version, but the desaturated colors don't help this atmosphere like they do in other base games tracks. Mario Kart World's version is the best one in my opinion because the colors pop more and there are more background details, but this one is just okay. Sweet Sweet Canyon is interesting to say the least. In concept, I love the theme being some sort of Candyland. In execution, boy does it need room for improvement. It's supposed to take inspiration from Wreck-It Ralph's Sugar Rush, but doesn't do enough to stick out. The colors are too desaturated for this particular theme. You just drive past a bunch of sweets and there's not much variety, and the giant lake doesn't look appealing. It's supposed to be soda, but it looks like piss instead. Also, there's this uninspired anti-gravity split path that definitely isn't overused. Yeah, it's an okay track, but it really needs some work. If I had a nickel for how many times in a modern Mario Kart game a haunted track was underwhelming and wasted because of style over substance, I'd have 2 nickels. One for Twisted Mansion and one for Boo Cinema and Mario Kart World. This track tries to be spooky and haunting like a haunted mansion should, but it doesn't have much more than random split paths and anti-gravity sections. Also, that underwater section seems forced and does nothing to the track. It's a fine track, and I like 1 or 2 elements it contains, but I'd much rather play DS Luigi's Mansion. Just like Tokyo Blur, New York Minute does the bare minimum to stick out as it's mostly just road, and not all that much substance. It's also wasted in potential because New York City is far bigger and more packed, with actual moving cars and some of the most memorable landmarks. This track barely scratches the surface on those, but it has some interesting elements. There's some Goombas and stopped cars to dodge, the slippery road that makes the track more interesting, as well as the final lap taking you on a new area. Otherwise, it's not a very memorable city track. Also, the music isn't bad like Paris Promenades, but it's definitely not fully realized. And same can be said with London Loop, except the track is way bigger and longer. It's once again just a bunch of road, but there are some more interesting elements than the previous city tracks I talked about. There's the drawbridge, some engaging turns, and the chain chomps detached in the final lap. Otherwise, it's one of the most overbloated city tracks and goes on for too long. The music, on the other hand, sounds cool on paper with the rock theme, but it's uninspired, repetitive, and doesn't sound like you're in London, making this track feel even more of a stretch. Anyways, that was it for the OK tracks. From this point on, all the tracks on this list are functionally good. And to start off, we have the B- tier, which has tracks that I hesitate to say are good, but they're still above average. And I will start off the first good tier with Rainbow Road. So, this game has 5 Rainbow Roads, and this is by far the weakest one. A Rainbow Road is supposed to be an epic finale to the base game, and this is the game's Nitro Rainbow Road, and it does as little as possible to be a legitimate finale. It's not a bad track, it's just underwhelming, and feels more like a regular track than a Rainbow Road. It's just a simple space station with a desaturated rainbow, and no vibes that make it feel like a journey's end or final challenge. It's still an acceptable track, and does something interesting, and there are some engaging elements, but I can't be any nicer than to rank it where it currently is. Now this track is something else. Double Dash's Dry Desert is a bit underrated. On one hand, it's a desert track, so people hate it for being barren and empty, but I found it to be well-paced as well as kind of hostile and dangerous. I think deserts are generally overlooked and can inherently be interesting in video games, and I like these elements they used, such as these pokies, collapsing sandstone pillars to trick off of, and the giant sinkhole. On the other hand, it's a downgrade from the original, which was more hostile and had better substance. This one sucked out some of that feel from the original, extracted a couple elements, and added a random oasis which has nothing but random tricks. It's not a very good remake and is already an uninspired track, but I kind of like it. However, this isn't the only desert track that got nerfed in this game. Another one is next in line, and is a worse remake of a better track. Yup, we have GBA Sunset Wilds next on this list, and it's one of the worst remade tracks in Mario Kart Deluxe. I used to completely defend this remake for having plenty of what I like, such as some engaging elements, the Western Frontier atmosphere and its excellent cowboy music, and the singing Shy Guys. But it doesn't deserve to be loved because of what they decided to remove. And unlike Dry Desert, where the original wasn't all that interesting, the original Sunset Wilds was amazing. It had many of the positives I brought up, and has a pretty good layout, posing a strong difficulty curve. But what really made it so unique is the sunset in each lap. Not only is that completely gone in Deluxe, because the lighting system doesn't support skybox changes, but they also butchered the layout, because they got Tor's version, and made it pathetically easier. And now it's almost a mirrored SNES Mario Circuit 3. The only reason why it's in the B- tier is because it's still kind of enjoyable. There are some interesting elements, and it still sticks out a bit, so it's still somewhat a good track, but man, it's a very disrespectful remake that doesn't pay a homage to its original counterpart. We should have had this in Mario Kart World instead. Not only could they take the time to make the layout closer to its original, but there's a day-night cycle in that game, and there's already an orange desert on the map, and that game was already being worked on during the Booster Course Pass. So they had no excuse to plan Sunset Wilds for this game if they had no choice but to f*** up this remake. Now this next remake, on the other hand, is an improvement over the original counterpart. The original SNES Rainbow Road was an okay track. It posed some challenge with rainbow thwomps and no guardrails, but it was less of a finale than certain other Rainbow Roads, even if it's better than the Nitro one. Now this remake is only good-ish because the rainbow thwomps can cause trickable shockwaves, and the remix and background help it pop out. Otherwise, it's more of a regular track than a Rainbow Rainbow Road, which could be why it's the second slaw in the Triforce Cup. Electrodome is another neat concept that isn't so much an execution. This time it's a disco theme and you're in some sort of nightclub, with these anti-gravity split paths twisting and winding around the giant disco ball, but it's another track that puts style over substance. As interesting as this track looks with its engaging concept, they don't really do anything with it. Also, that disco music isn't powerful enough to capture the essence of the theme. However, despite its lack of substance and execution, it's still a decent track for how engaging it can still be here and there. I'm comfortable giving it a B-. GBA Boo Lake is another very interesting concept that doesn't do too much with it. Unlike Sunset Wilds, this one stays faithful to the original, while adding an underwater section and making the only necessary changes to the layout. Otherwise, it's just a spooky pier track that doesn't do too much to stick out. Also, one or two of the turns might be too tight for this compact layout. And the last B- track is Sky High Sunday. This is another track that I used to defend 3 years ago because I thought the anti-gravity was interesting, and the ability to show off by jumping between paths. But the more I do it, the less interesting it is. So far, it's just a simple oval with a bunch of different jumps, and anti-gravity slapped on top with the rails being random speed boosts, which removes the difficulty. At least the theme is interesting, and the jumps are a bit different, unlike a certain other oval ranked way lower on this list. That being said, it's amazing how Mario Kart World not only brought back the most unlikable Tour Nitro, but went out of its way to fix what was wrong with it and turn it into a fan favorite. But as this version stands, I think a high B- is warranted. And now the B+ tier. These are the good tracks that are nothing more than just good. They're not great or amazing, but we're getting there. And my first track that is B+ is another controversial one, but I like this game's Mario Circuit Nitro. It's not as memorable as 7's or DS's remake, but it's a fun and energetic track. It looks uninspired because it's just a simple 8, but this one feels more fast-paced, and I really like that it twists around with anti-gravity and is two-sided. Also, the music feels right with this track's gameplay, giving off even more energy vibes to a point where I don't end up caring if it's just a simple shape. The presentation and feels are where it's at, something Toad's Turnpike doesn't have. Overall, one of the most underrated circuits. Finally, the first good city track. Sure, Sydney Sprint is a simple roadway, but there are more turns, elements, and a presentation than the others I brought up. I really like that lap 3 is lap 1 in reverse, and lap 2 takes you on 2 different routes. It has a good flow, but is sadly not the most ambitious city track ever, so it can only get a B+. Sunshine Airport is once again another interesting concept that doesn't meet its fullest in execution. I like the idea of racing in an airport and alongside other planes, but there isn't much more. There are some cool track elements like the baggage conveyor belt and a few of those jumps, but otherwise it's not all that interesting. And that anti-gravity section is forced and seems like whatever. It's still a good track and has its own charm, but it's not enough to be up there on the list. Sky Garden is another GBA track that was amazing on its original platform, but got a bad remake in this game as it nerfed its difficulty by butchering the layout. The only reason why it's better than Sunset Wilds is because it kept some of the shortcuts and turns, so it's a little more faithful than Sunset Wilds. And by itself, it's still a good track because it has some epic sky music, some good looking atmosphere, and a few good turns. Otherwise, it's Cloud Top Cruise Jr. and still not a good remake. It's another track I used to defend before realizing why it isn't actually that good. Just like Sunset Wilds, we should have had this in Mario Kart World instead. Sure, it may be difficult to implement a sky track in an open world, but Nintendo made it work for some of their new tracks, as well as Sky High Sunday and Airship Fortress. And even if the track is still enjoyable, we shouldn't want it to be worse than the original. And World could have made it amazing again. Royal Raceway is one of the harder circuits in the series, and one of the more interesting ones. It has an interesting princess theme and some of the sharpest turns, as well as very few hazards, the paraglider section with hot air balloons, And, well, that's basically it. The original one was more iconic for letting you drive up to Peach's castle, but this version blocked it off. Now, if they instead introduced the arrow gimmick and let you go around and through the castle in laps 2 and /or 3, that would be amazing. But otherwise, it's a good track with nothing to write home about. Alright, DS Wario Stadium is one of the most inconsistent tracks I played in 8 Deluxe. On one hand, it's a cool remake from a basic track in Mario Kart DS, bringing the track to life by adding an anti-gravity section and a bunch of new colors to make it pop out. But on the other hand, it's all over the place in execution. It's a generalized stadium track with one great addition, and then the other ones that didn't need to be here. The underwater section is random and doesn't do anything, and the electronic remix is out of place for Stadium. In Waluigi Pinball, it sounds much better, but here, it's unfit. It's still a good Stadium track, even if I prefer Waluigi Stadium or N64 Wario Stadium in World. Merry Mountain is another unlikable Tour Nitro, as it's in a similar boat to Sky High Sunday being an oval, only slightly modified. However, this one has more fans than the other track, as the oval has some engaging elements, such as the broken train track shortcut and the paraglider ramp that shows up in lap 2. But it doesn't have much more besides a few turns. Also, the summit is empty and drags for a bit. You just see anti-gravity boosts and a useless half-pipe. But some people find this track interesting because of the Christmas presentation, and that kind of slaps here. It's still only B+ because it's not much more than that. At next on the list, we have another city track, and one that is a bit more inconsistent than the previous ones I mentioned. Not the most inconsistent one, but we're getting there. Bangkok Rush is one of those city tracks that throws in as much material as possible to make you feel like you're actually in a city, while also adding other elements like the boats to trick off of, the monorail, the bustling market to bounce off of, and the paraglider through the monument. All of this would give it a higher ranking, but some of the roads and shortcuts are not fully well designed. The ramps are structured so you have to be quick about turning left or right before you can see, and some turns come up before you know it. And another thing, why did they remove the ink piranha plants? The ones that made the monorail section interesting? I don't want to make a big deal if the rest of the track is good, but it was so close to being in the A- tier. And we have 2 cities in a row. 2 good ones that could have been great. This time, it's Rome Avanti, a simpler one with not much more than buildings, and tighter turns and alleyways that can also take you by surprise. Although there's less of them here, and it's Wave 6, so I guess it's supposed to be that hard. There's also a paraglider section with fuzzies, and it's the only track with rocky wrenches. Well, no big deal. This was the first time they were redesigned, before Jamboree carried on that new/old model, and eventually Mario Kart World. That being said, it's a more basic theme that sets you in the right mood, but not much more. The only thing truly notable is the Colosseum, but there's a much bigger track like this in Double Dash that really needs attention now. Overall, it's good, but none more. We've had plenty of Mario circuits, and this is the best one. It wasn't as good in DS, but it was still enjoyable for its decent charm, and for being a difficult Mario circuit with tighter turns and fire piranhas. So much so, they had to put it in the Star Cup. But this remake added even more substance. Not much has changed, but they introduced a newly added forest section with a wiggler that wakes up on lap 3. It's not the most exciting new addition to any remake, but it's still a nice surprise that they didn't have to do. Overall, it's consistently good, and I guess it wasn't a bad curveball after all. I'm not upset anymore that we didn't get Airship Fortress because that track exists in Mario Kart World now and was made even better. Riverside Park is another GBA track that is short and simple with not so much to write home about. Yeah, many of the Booster Course past GBA tracks were nothing to scream about. Some were generally praised or unanimously serviceable, and the ones that were fan favorites got ruined and became unlikable tracks. But this one had some improvements to make it better than the original counterpart. The big loop was converted into a cave section with a waterfall to jump out of, and then a few lesser details were added. Oh, and Patuis were brought to this track, and they weren't even in Tor's version. It's a good track, even if it's not the most ambitious. And lastly, for the B+ tier, I decided to pick Mute City. I can understand why some people love it because it's an F-Zero track, and it uses anti-gravity and dash panels to represent it. But Big Blue does it so much more. This one isn't so fully realized in my opinion. It's a bland track, and several of the elements are reused. And while I like its uses for it, I think a crossover track needs to do more to meet its fullest potential. It's still a good track, but it doesn't feel like an F-Zero track enough. We're not even halfway through, and we already reached our next category, which is the A- tier. And these are tracks that are still not spotless, but I can say they're great. Yeah, we talked about the generally good tracks, and now we're talking about ones I really like. And my first great track is GBA Snowland, the best GBA track in specifically the Booster Course Pass, as the base game had better GBA remakes. It's a simple winter wonderland with a jolly atmosphere, and I enjoy slip and slide tracks. This one isn't too much more than moving item boxes, penguins, and that ice lake to loop around, but it's a nice track and is understandably an A-. My next choice, though, is gonna be controversial. And while I already have shown some hot takes of mine, this one is gonna make almost everyone angry. But at number 57, we have Bone Dry Dunes. I'm gonna say it right now. Bone Dry Dunes is criminally overhated. I really like playing this track. Sure, the atmosphere is barren and ugly, being just a desert wasteland, but it's not supposed to look pretty. If anything, it's also a bit well-paced and uplifting to me with the elevation and music. I really like the twisting paths, sand ship throwing coins, the dry Bowser representation, bone piranhas as hazards, and that cool shortcut. It's not even frustrating because I like the challenge of turning sharply and watching out for hazards that are also in plain sight. It plays surprisingly well in 150cc, and while it's a bit much in 200cc, that's the same for every track. Overall, I really enjoy this track. It's one of the most underrated tracks, but it can't go higher on this list because it's more of a general desert wasteland than something special. But I already said that deserts are overhated, and I love Dry Bowser and how they themed it around some desert bones. It's a great track in my opinion, and I just can't dislike it, so A-. Cheep Cheep Beach is a great beach track. It looks like a simple walk in the park, but it has plenty of personality and a bit of substance. You race on a pier before paragliding to the beach, and then you encounter a bunch of Cheep Cheeps and sidesteppers, and quickly drive through a forest. Not the most developed track, but it's a nice relaxing beach where some style over substance actually makes it work, and the music helps. Daisy Cruiser is a nice soothing cruise ship ride that makes you feel like you're on summer vacation. It's also on the simpler side despite its complex shape, with it mostly being a multi-layered oval, and it's a little short on substance. There are some split paths, a pool with floating Goombas, the shifting tables, and the underwater room with the orange boost tube, and I guess the music is fine. I prefer the more chaotic and upbeat music that Peach Beach used in Mario Kart World, but it's a bit relaxing and fits the setting. If I was gonna show someone what a Mario Kart Wii track is, my first thought would be Mushroom Gorge. While it's nowhere near my favorite track, it's a simple concept that can be fun. There are mushrooms to bounce off of, and some can be good shortcuts, while others pose a difficulty curve. There's also the added paraglider mushroom from Mario Kart 7. It's a great track, and is one of Wii's first tracks to be remembered for, even if I don't find it to be all that special. Actually, if I had to find a reason, it's not fully realized in its concept. It does a good job with its gimmick, but besides the cave section, it's more of a tech demo. Now, imagine this track on steroids. That would easily be S tier. I used to not like Dolphin Shoals very much, but it grew on me. Maybe it was a bit slow-paced, or maybe the music just wasn't that interesting. But I looked back, and it's actually really good. It captures the essence of swimming with dolphins, has some engaging track elements such as the trick ramps with boost rings, the underwater pipes to trick over, and the giant moray eel. And even though the first music is a bit boring and uninteresting, the second music you hear in lap 3 or Out of the Water is much better. Overall, a great track, even if I can't be more generous with it. If there's one Tour City track that is beautiful and captures some excellent autumn and winter vibes, it would be Vancouver Velocity. It's a beautiful track that exemplifies the presentation with its nighttime and upbeat music. It also helps with the Aurora Borealis and the ropes course section through the pine forest, and the only city track that uses an anti-gravity section. There's also the ice skating rink and this autumn tree park, and buildings with different colored windows. With all that, why isn't this higher? Despite all the praise I just gave it, the lap change needs work. You start off at the best version, being the ropes course, then the second lap is interesting with the big loop around the city, but then the final lap is just a tunnel, and a shortened version of the second one. It starts at its peak, then ends at its weakest lap. If there's one complaint, it's that the lap change is structured all wrong. If they swapped the first and final lap, this would have been in the next category. Oh, what a shame, but I guess it's still great. Tour Berlin Byways is probably the most inconsistent city track. And no, it's definitely not bad in any way. It's a great city track, but it's a little all over the place. First of all, the bombastic music and traffic flow make for good racing, but that's only the second lap, and the music doesn't entirely flow consistently. We have the first lap that takes you through some train tracks, nothing memorable except that difficult to enter train with the double item box, and the third lap has more engaging elements and turns, and is the only track in 8 Deluxe that lets you trick off wombs, which are a bit broken by the way. Also, that one turn is not well implemented. It's still a great track, but I can't put it higher if it's still not that flawless. And I can say the same about Amsterdam Drift, though it's actually more consistent in track design and has a more unique theme. There's that giant meadow with the Monty moles digging, there's the canal with some good water boosts and sharp turns, and there's the trolleys to dodge. That being said, the final lap was a bit weird. It took you backwards in one section, which wouldn't be a problem, but it also meant more sharp turns in awkward spots. And then the flower field is a bit empty besides a few piranha plants, and is over too soon. Also, the music is fine. It can be a bit annoying, but it's much better than Paris Promenade's music. Waluigi Stadium is one of the most drastically changed tracks that ended up being equally as good as the previous ones. It was a good enough track in Double Dash, then Wii's remake improved it by adding half pipes. Then this version added anti-gravity ramps and a bunch of foreground details that pop. But then they also removed the dancing signs and nerfed the straightaway, so it evens out. Don't get me wrong, I really like this track for its well-paced gameplay and music, and it makes far better uses of jumps than Excite Bike Arena, and is a much better dirt bike stadium. Other than that, it's still technically a simple stadium track. Well, will you look at that? Now we're at the halfway point. Yeah, this is gonna be a long video. Honestly, with how high we're up on the tier list and how many tracks are left to go, is a real good sign that many of these are enjoyable. And now to open up the top half of the ranking. Wild Woods is another general theme that manages to pop out and contain some good substance. It's another track that goes a little to the extreme, but doesn't do enough to be special. There's the tree branches to race on, with one being a shortcut, the paraglider section with swinging Shy Guys, the water slide, and the lily pads with boosts. It's a really good track, but nothing more. 3DS Rosalina's Ice World is one of the most interesting themes ever. It's a Rosalina themed track, something we don't often get. And while it's mostly just a random ice world, it can be an ice themed planet that could be from Super Mario Galaxy if you look at other elements tied to it. But even if the theme is uninspired and wasted, the gameplay isn't. We have this big pothole to drift your way around, also more ice physics, awesome, and then there's the half pipes that are a bit janky but manageable. And there's the floating ice platform that disappears after lap 1, and the underwater section in the ice lake. And then to finish off the track, we have the cave with those difficult dash panels and shortcut. Could we have had something better than this? Sure, but is it still a great track? Yes, no doubt. Now, the original Wario's Gold Mine was amazing. It perfectly presents Wario's interest in gold, and has some real good elements such as the 2 half pipes, difficult turns on the tracks with some areas not having guardrails, the minecarts to dodge, and that cool shortcut. Unfortunately, this otherwise still great track isn't as good of a remake. The half pipes were removed and half the course is anti-gravity, where they decided to take out the challenge. Instead of getting hit by minecarts, you just get free speed boosts. And the shortcut is made easier. I still gotta hand it to Nintendo for making this track fun and constructive, but the original Wii version was better. And you know what else got this similar treatment? Wii Coconut Mall. The original was also amazing with tons of excellent elements and shortcuts with a stellar presentation of racing through a mall. And while it was never my favorite, it's one I remembered the most as a kid. However, this remake kind of ruins the track. All the colors are too saturated and cartoony for this particular theme. The escalators have been turned into conveyor belts, all the Miis are gone, and the parking lot got the worst change, with the cars doing occasional donuts instead of blocking your path. And there are no more dash panels there. If this remake didn't take out half the track's personality, it would have been A+ or S tier, but since it's still a really enjoyable and developed track, I can give it an A-. I've been talking about tracks that do a good job in presentation, and I still have more later on this list. But if there's one track that excels at it, it would be Singapore Speedway. This track has a beautiful, bombastic atmosphere, combining natural elements with cityscapes and metal structures, and makes good use of water features. However, that's just the style. What about the substance? Well, there's the 2 conveyor belts on those man-made trees. There's a few glider sections, 2 with dash rings, and one of them has a side road with regular dash panels and the Goomba stacks. And then there's another glider section with water geysers to trick off, and that's it. Singapore Speedway, you were so close to being amazing, but you just had to waste half the track with nothing but road. And the Chinatown section is also devoid of substance, and that hotel rooftop pool has a few Goombas and dash panels, but it's wasted on that. As much as I still really like this track, it was so close to being better, yet so far away. At least it's structured better than Vancouver Velocity's lap change, being each lap from best to worst in that order. On the other hand, Peach Gardens got a significant glow up. I didn't really like the original version. It looked kind of messy, and I just felt there were elements randomly placed and had no reason to be here. But the remake fixed all that, and then some. Not only did this version move elements to where they made more sense, but they decorated some to make them pop. In fact, they upgraded a lot of visuals in not just the track, but the background as well. They even went the extra mile to use the arrow gimmick in the final lap, and take you around the whole thing backwards just like Pear's Promenade. As a regular track, it's kind of mind-blowing, and they didn't have to do this. That being said, the final lap is also the first 2 backwards, so it doesn't change too much besides the paraglider section, even if it's a nice bonus. Otherwise, it went from an okay track to a great one. This track is something. Thwomp Ruins is an engaging track that not only put Thwomps to good use, but adds a historical ancient ruins theme. It even further helps with some other fun hazards that make sense, and that paraglider section that opens in lap 2. There's also that shortcut that is still satisfying. I really dig it. Neo Bowser City is another great track that could have been even higher on this list. First of all, it's one of the only Bowser tracks that has a different theme than Lava or Castle, as this particular version is a futuristic cityscape during a rainstorm. And what else makes it stick out is the insane turns to take. You gotta pull off some insane sharp turns while slipping and sliding, and I love it. The only reason why it's not higher is because one particular section is a bit too harsh on the controls. But otherwise, this track really is something. Once again, great great, but could have been better. Super Bell Subway is next on this list. It's another unique theme that takes a bunch of trains on one path, giving you a bunch of split paths to take and lets you jump on them. There's also this paraglider section that you can use to fly over a bunch of trains. If only that music wasn't so dull and forgettable, this could have easily been even higher on this list. DS Waluigi Pinball is kind of overrated. It's a great track that's also an out-of-the-blue idea that just needs a little more to be amazing. I love the concept of this track being a pinball machine, where you race down with a bunch of pinballs while feeling like one of them. And even more so, the bottom section where there's a bunch of pinballs to dodge. This whole thing feels like a pinball machine. Or does it? Yeah, as it turns out, the actual pinball machine towards the end of the track is where the real excitement happens. In the meantime, you have just a bunch of linear ramps that make the pinball machine feel a bit unfocused. While it's still somewhat exciting to dodge pinballs on your way down, it also drags on more than I think it should, which kept it from being even better in my opinion. Yoshi Circuit might be one of the best circuits in the whole entire series. DS Mario Circuit may be the best Mario circuit, but this is the best general circuit. It's shaped like a Yoshi, which already makes it unique. But it's also one of the challenging circuits because there's these insane turns to take which can really put your drifting skills to the test. It's another one of those simple tracks that puts enough effort into really sticking out. And now I get to finish this category with the best SNES remake in Mario Kart Deluxe, Bowser's Castle 3. This track was one of the better ones in the first game, but the elevation and added elements made it even better. It's a fully realized remake, possibly even more realized than the GBA ones in this pass. It's also everything this gosh awful Mario Circuit 3 wishes it could be. We have some thwomps, bone piranhas, fireballs, lava geysers, and the first half being an anti-gravity section. We also got the multiple jump platforms separated apart, and the 3 split hallways you can drive on top of now, so it even paid a homage to the original. It's a great remake. Once again, the only reason it's down here is because it's on the simple side as a track in general. But I'm glad we got this track. We needed another Bowser's Castle in 8 Deluxe, we never had an SNES one remade before, and we wanted our last SNES track to actually be good. And it took till Wave 6 to get all 3 of those things now. And now we're getting to the gems of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. For the A+ tier, we have tracks that still aren't perfect, but are generally amazing in my opinion. And to start, we have a track that I never would have considered putting here. Toad Harbor needs no introduction. We all know about this Surfshine Rock song, these several split paths and shortcuts, and this section full of trams. It's by far the best harbor town track that is packed full of substance. I used to not love this track, and I don't know what was wrong with me, but this track is amazing and I shall not sleep on it any longer, so it can kickstart the A+ category. And next is another highway track, and that's Moonview Highway. Besides Mushroom City, this might be the most well-designed traffic course ever. Its layout is a bit more insane than the others, contains a few shortcuts, uses bob-omb cars to make it more of a unique hazard, and then the other half adds more lanes and dash panels. So you have to be strategic to which ones you use. I know I keep saying why certain tracks aren't higher on this list, but this one city section is a bit too much of a straightaway to be any more unique. And some of the difficulty was nerfed as they removed faster cars switching lanes from Wii. Well, it's as good as it could get. Anyways, my next entry is Los Angeles Laps, and it's one of the best city tracks. This is 100% checkpoint based, as each section is completely different from another, making it reach its fullest potential, mostly. And while the track is still on the simple side of just being road, it has enough challenge and substance to be down in the A+. But let's talk about each section. The first one is a simple beach, but there are some sidesteppers and skate ramps to trick off. off. The second one is the least exciting, but still good. You glide over Dodger Stadium and drive past Beverly Hills. Then the last one is the most interesting part. Sure, it's just an oil field, but it comes with many split paths with some containing ramps to jump off. And then you loop around to encounter one more hazard, which is neat. It almost feels like Yoshi Valley inspired this. Also, there's the satisfying paraglider section, and the music, probably the best music of the city tracks in my opinion, which raises the bar of this track. It's amazing. Hyrule Circuit is another one of the coolest and most well-designed crossover tracks in 8 Deluxe. You race around Hyrule Field and enter Hyrule Castle, while the theme plays a homage to some of the other Zelda games. But that's not all. You can get rupees as coins, retextured piranha plants, and swoops to fit the Zelda theme, and best of all, a very difficult but satisfying shortcut. When drifting, you have to precisely position your drifting and hit all 3 anti-gravity boosts, and then you'll unlock that jump boost. Now, if only there was a little bit more elements to it, this could have been S tier, but otherwise I love this track. Remember what I said about Mute City not being so fully realized? Well, Big Blue, on the other hand, is a better representation of an F-Zero track. Not only does it have more F-Zero substance than Mute City, but it's checkpoint based like Mount Wario, although it's not as good as that track. Besides anti-gravity and dash panels, there are split paths, waterfalls, and conveyor belts, posing some challenge and giving it more personality. It's so well designed, and each section is even made distinguishable from each other. That being said, if I had to find a reason why it isn't S tier, I guess some elements are reused in different areas, and I don't have much F-Zero taste. But you know what? It's still an amazing track, and I'll rank it as high as I'm comfortable with. Choco Mountain is one of those tracks that isn't special on paper, but really has what it takes to be so high on my list. The original one wasn't so mind-blowing, but I found it interesting to have a simple chocolate mountain that actually looks good. But the only notable thing besides a few turns is that Rolling Rock section. But this remake converted this track into an old Mesa mineshaft by adding a more mountainous remix, as well as turning one section into a cave with swoops flying at you, and changing a few more areas to amp up the difficulty. However, what really made this track pop out is the presentation, something that was enough to make a once good track amazing. It's not as good as World's remake, but it sits comfortably in A+. And to open up the top 30, my next entry is Rock Mountain. Paragliding isn't the best feature in Mario Kart, considering some tracks just slap it on random areas, but other tracks make good use of it because they put mid-air hazards or elements that wouldn't otherwise work. Well, Rock Mountain takes full advantage of paragliding. The atmosphere makes this so satisfying to use the paraglider, and there are pipes pushing wind which you have to avoid or can trick off of. And there's this one giant shortcut that is easy but satisfying. There are some other elements too, such as rolling rocks and swoops, but paragliding is the meat of this course. Now, if only they made an actual challenge instead of just fun and games with it, then I would confidently rank it S tier. And honestly, besides a few low tier tracks, I don't care too much if the Booster Course Pass graphics are cheap, because the gameplay makes up for it. That's why some of these ended up so high, and the same applies to my next choice. Shroom Ridge may not be the best highway in the series, but it's another simple track that is well designed and masters presentation. It's another highway, but this time in some foresty mountains. However, that's not what lands it in the A+ tier. It's that bombastic remix, which is in my opinion the best music of Mario Kart Deluxe. It gives off these "let's go" vibes and flows consistently, which makes it perfect racing music. Honestly, having that really ups my approach to this track. I know it sounds biased, but it's once again presentation. Hell, I used to rank it S tier because of my bias, but I let more time pass and eventually decided this current placement would make the most sense. Music Park is also definitely one of the most unique out of the blue ideas for a track. A rhythm-based track with musical instruments and enemies going with the beat? Sign me up. Yeah, what makes this track stick out is that you can race on musical instruments, dodge piranha plants that are dancing to the tunes, and avoid hitting those bouncy enemies while also tricking off their shockwaves at the right time. It's all masterfully crafted. The only reason why it's not S tier is because the background is just some random void, making this feel randomly placed in space. Otherwise, amazing track. My next track in the A+ tier is Calamari Desert. It was already a great track in Mario Kart 64, because while it's just a simple loop in a desert, the train gimmick was something special because you had to watch for it when it passes by, and the atmosphere makes the train stick out more. But now on laps 2 and 3, you take an extra route on the train tracks and actually get more interactions with the train, while going a different route on a different lap. It was amazing how City Tracks introduced the arrow gimmick, but bringing it to a retro track was even better, and it was a better use of the arrow than Peach Gardens, which was taking the same route backwards. We had plenty of tracks with rolling boulders, and there are still some more on this list, but man, this track takes full advantage of that already interesting gimmick. DK Mountain is the most well-designed rolling rock track ever made. It's also how you make a difficult track fun, and not cruel or unfair like Grumble Volcano. Speaking of Volcano, this track starts off with the cannon launching you to that angry volcano as a big warning that you once again embark on a dangerous journey, before you race down the mountain and make a bunch of turns and dodge boulders, while using some half pipes, and then you cross the shaky bridge before you finish your lap. That being said, this could have also been S tier if the music wasn't so quiet and calming, which is a bit unfit. I mean, Mario Kart World fixed that in Dino Jungle. However, one epic ride. Next up is Shy Guy Falls. I love when tracks make good use of going down a waterfall, and while this isn't the best example of one, it does a great job using it. You go around a bunch of twisting paths and jumps that leave you hyped for this waterfall ride, then you ride up via anti-gravity while trying to get on those moving dash panels. Then you loop around the top and race down the fall to a paraglider section, and then besides a few shortcuts, you wind down a bit from all the fun, and the music helps it even more. It's not my favorite waterfall track, that's Cheep Cheep Falls, but it deserves to be in the A+ tier. And speaking of waterfall tracks, Koopa Cape is next. Besides Cheep Cheep Falls, this would easily be my favorite waterfall track, if not for one major change. I mean, there's this upbeat music that changes in each section, then there's the waterfall to race down before I hit the underwater tube and jump out. It really feels like a legitimate water park, something that cannot be said for a certain other track. But they just had to ruin it. Why did they remove the top of the water tube and electrical spinning hazards? Doesn't that take out the challenge completely? Out of all the nerfed Wii tracks, this one really got downgraded. Not as much as Coconut Mall and Wario's Gold Mine, but you get the gist. And while there's anti-gravity, it's not that great. Koopa Cape was so close to being in the S tier, but it just had to fumble it up. But I can't not love this track if it does everything else right. Athens Dash is amazing. It's another Tour City track, but is completely different than any other. Most city tracks are more literal cities with a bunch of roads and sometimes landmarks and elements. This one, on the other hand, is a bunch of ancient ruins and some old architecture taking place around a mountain, followed by some of the best elements such as falling pillars, huff pipes that actually help you, and more boulders. It's not a perfect city track. There are few areas I care for less than others, but it's incredibly developed, so I gotta hand it to them. However, Athens Dash is not my favorite city track. That's Madrid Drive. Yep, you heard me. Madrid Drive is the best of the cities in my opinion. It may not be as challenging, but holy shit, does it have more substance and feel more like a city than any other. All the other ones just have roads and contain some elements and one or two notable landmarks, but none of them feel as robust as this one. We have the town square that recaptures the Wiggler gimmick in DS Mario Circuit. We have the market with thwomps and tight spaces. We have the train station with a conveyor as an escalator. The museum with a live piranha plant. The lake with more trickable geysers, and the football stadium with shoe Goombas. This city has almost everything, and its remix containing the Spanish guitar also makes this more intriguing, as it slaps hard. That being said, I'll admit they could have done a little more with those landmarks than be in and out in no time, but seeing so many of them already says how hard they cooked for this track. It's amazing, and I will keep it that way. Now, this one is truly epic. Cloudtop Cruise is an absolute representation of a sky-high journey, with epic and courageous music playing and even a small section of Galaxy's music. There's a bunch of clouds to race on, as well as that bouncy shortcut. There's that small airship, and that giant thundercloud with lightning striking dash panels. Sky Garden was just a simple circuit in the sky, and while it had its own charm in Super Circuit, this is a definitive sky track. Animal Crossing feels too simple to be higher in this list than Hyrule Circuit because it has less interactive elements and a more basic layout, but bear with me. While it's cool to race around an already built civilization in New Leaf, with several buildings, NPCs, fruit as mushrooms, and a few more small details, that's not the main purpose of this track. What makes it so special is the 4 seasons, with each having a different atmosphere and different track elements, making each variant distinguishable from another. The fact that they went the extra mile to give this track multiple versions really raises the stakes, something Excitebike Arena couldn't do. Overall, Animal Crossing has the most variety and is a different experience every time you play, which makes it this good. N64 Yoshi Valley used to be one of my favorite tracks, but I looked back and noticed something it was missing. First of all, I dig the atmosphere being some sort of mountainous valley that is partly inspired by Yoshi's Island, even if there's a fully realized representation of it. I also love the premise of various split paths, with some different hazards, whether it's dodging barrels, Goombas walking on the track, or swoops flying at you, and I also love the spinning egg. That being said, my only drawback is that the split paths section isn't fully realized. It's cool on the surface to have different paths, but some get muddied together, and one of them, the cannon, is just a detour that didn't need to exist. I also wish they kept the porcupines from the original version. Otherwise, it's an amazing track that could have been near perfect. Ninja Hideaway is one of the earliest Booster Course Pass fan favorites that didn't lose any reputations, considering how Wave 1 fell flat for most people. As to why this isn't S tier, even I can't really answer that. It really is an excellent track packed full of substance and split paths, as well as moving and surprise objects. It really is a house of tricky ninjas. I guess the only drawback could be that final big turn, which is too sharp for once again this game's controls, and that random boost fan that doesn't do you any good. Otherwise, it's incredibly insane and developed enough for a high ranking, but for a track to be S tier, it has to be both this ambitious and have even less issues. DK Jungle is one of the most well-designed and enjoyable tracks, for adding tons of good substance and excellent fan service. It's based off of Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is one of my most nostalgic childhood games. And while I think Tropical Freeze is better, this track really knocked it out of the park with its Returns representation. There's the jungle world with tikis, bouncing frogs, screaming pillars, a bouncy flower, and DK's house. And they even put in the Golden Temple. And not only are all these elements cool to go through or drive past, but half of these are interactable. Now, just like Hyrule Circuit, it's still not perfect. There are some things it could use to make it in the S tier, but man, they really cooked hard with this track. And to close up on the A+ tier, we have Dragon Drift Way, one of the most unique and insanely twisted tracks ever to be made. They took one of Galaxy 2's most memorable bosses, Gobblegut, and made a giant track out of this where you race on him, and just twists around, giving you some of the most insane turns ever, posing a strong difficulty curve. They also took said track and inserted it into a Japanese theme, which I absolutely love. If I had to come up with one reason why this once again isn't S tier, I guess there aren't really any major hazards or track elements, but otherwise it's one of the most fun tracks in the game. And last of all, the S tier. These are tracks that are close to perfect, and are masterpieces in my opinion. A+ had already amazing tracks, but these ones are some of my absolute favorites. My first track in the S tier is Yoshi's Island. This might be the best crossover track to ever be made. It has more iconic and interactable elements than any other, and is basically DK Jungle at its most, but for Yoshi instead of Donkey Kong. There's several different themes used in Yoshi games, some enemies that existed, but the best part is the question mark cloud that activates a shortcut. Just like Hyrule Circuit, this one adds a difficult but satisfying shortcut to enable, and then there's Yoshi's usual goal pull. They also remixed the athletic theme from the original Yoshi's Island. The only reason why it's at the bottom of the S tier is because it had some stiff competition, meaning all the others were even more interesting than this masterpiece. Otherwise, it's an excellent crossover that contains the most substance and fan service and doesn't sacrifice any qualities. Piranha Plant Cove might just be my favorite underwater track ever. It also makes great use of the arrow gimmick and different areas per lap, making each lap distinguishable. But unlike the cities, this one didn't have to implement it. The first stretch isn't too exciting, but it's a nice warm-up for the rest of this track. It's a big underwater loop with some nice, relaxing underwater music, a couple of ruins and trenches, as well as some elements before the next two laps give even more. Then the next two laps become insanely adventurous and chaotic with ruins to trick off, thwomps and dash panels, clams to avoid getting eaten by, and one giant moray eel you've been following this whole time. It feels like an underwater adventure, and I love it. It's another track that excels at presentation, and still contains enough substance to be unique. It's such an amazing track, even more than just that. N64 Rainbow Road was one of the worst tracks in Mario Kart 64. It was way too long to be 3 laps, and the entirety of this track had guardrails, which took out all the challenge. The only substance it had was an occasional change hump. And then, Mario Kart Deluxe fixed all those problems. Made this 6-minute circuit an actual Rainbow Road by removing several guardrails and making it 1 lap. And while it's a short finale because it's less than 2 minutes, it's enough to capture the essence of a Rainbow Road. Also, it's checkpoint based, so that makes it a journey of its own right. A perfect send-off to the original Wii U game before it added a DLC expansion, and then the Switch port added a booster course pass. Piranha Plant Slide was already an amazing track in Mario Kart 7. It takes the basic New Super Mario Bros. And Piranha Plant theme, and makes a sewer out of warp pipes in one of the most mind-blowing ways possible. And in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it gets one of the best remakes possible, by taking an already engaging track to a new level for the better, especially that underwater anti-gravity section, and making it even more packed. It's truly a masterpiece. This is another one of the best remakes in Mario Kart Deluxe. Sherbet Land on Double Dash was not very good, as the slippery controls made it kind of unplayable. But this remake is much better because the more refined controls make this far more playable. Not only that, but they changed it to nighttime and added some underwater sections that are really cool. Also, it's GBA Snowland on steroids. But as of everything it already has, there's this wonderful music, the skating Shy Guys, angry ice objects to dodge, and the slip and slide physics that are really satisfying. It needs no introduction. Besides Bone Dry Dunes, Cheese Land might be the most underrated track in this game. On one hand, Bone Dry Dunes is ranked a lot lower, but on the other hand, this track has a lot more fans, while that other track is more unanimously hated. It's not faithful to the original, which was a cheese planet with mice, as this remake is more of a desert canyon, but it's almost equally as good. I love the upbeat, fast-paced music, cheese craters to trick off, chain chomps to dodge, and once again, amazing shortcuts. And as a remake, it's one of the most impressive ones ever to be revamped, unlike any of the Booster Course Pass ones, which did the bare minimum. And it's not even the best Super Circuit track in the game. This might be my favorite Bowser's Castle in the Mario Kart series, although Mario Kart Worlds might once again overtake it. Normally, Bowser's Castle tracks are generally chaotic and possibly dangerous, while also lava-themed. But this one adds a rock kick-ass theme and captures the chaotic energy of modern Mario games, with the heavy metal machinery added to it. But that's just the style. What about substance? Well, there's the lasers that shoot the floor, the rotating fire bars and swinging pendulum, the boulders going downhill towards the end, and the best part being Big Bowser punching the track. It may not be as iconic as him shooting fireballs, but it poses an excellent challenge that for once puts the anti-gravity split path to good use. You have to pay attention to Bowser before choosing your path, and you can also trick off his waves. It's such an incredible Bowser track and deserves to be up in the S tier. Wii Rainbow Road is the fan favorite of the Rainbow Road tracks. We all know this track type is supposed to be one of the hardest tracks in the series, with difficult turns and shortness of guardrails, serving as a final gauntlet. And this one masters it, as well as its finalistic feel, setting you up for one last challenge while saying goodbye to the Booster Course Pass as it's the last track. And the several challenging constructive elements make this feel like a test to your skills and a reward for mastering them. However, there's one more Rainbow Road on this list. 3DS Rainbow Road might just be the best Rainbow Road I ever play, at least until Mario Kart World came out. I know I keep comparing it to that game, but World's Rainbow Road even put this track to shame. And this is a sectioned Rainbow Road, so it serves as a final adventure, along with that bombastic but emotionally finalistic music, and some additional elements besides general difficulty curve, such as Saturn's rings and the moon. I know this isn't the last track of the game, as I just talked about Wii's Rainbow Road, but this track feels like a journey's end, and an emotional farewell to other things as well. It perfectly captures the essence of Rainbow Road. And even if it's the best one in 8 Deluxe, it still got dethroned by another one in another game. At number 6, we have Wii Maple Treeway. We all love this track, don't we, comments? We know about Mushroom Gorge and Coconut Mall being fan favorites that draw people's interest into Mario Kart Wii, but Maple Treeway is the one that spoke to me more, and has always been my most enjoyed, besides a certain other Wii track. It has an excellent autumnal atmosphere and some wonderful music tied to it. The big cannon and these twisting, winding tree branches, the top section with the wigglers, and the half pipe. The only thing that's gone is the bouncy net, but otherwise, Maple Treeway is so masterfully crafted and well structured, and is one of the most unique and twisted tracks ever. Now, this track, Mount Wario might be the best one in the entire game. It's not quite number 1 on this list, but I can understand why it would be anyone else's. It's a true masterpiece. This track tackles the 3-section premise and makes the best use out of it, and it feels like a legitimate journey of its own right. You start off at the top of a snowy mountain and you race down on the ice roads while avoiding slipping off. Then you enter a cave and a waterfall inside with boost jumps and a paraglider section, before you go through a dam with moving dash panels, then a wooded section with split paths, and to finish the race down a ski resort. This track is a race down a giant snowy mountain, and I already love mountains for their epic and adventurous feel. The only reason why this isn't number 1 is because the next few on this list are a bit more unique, but also the ski section could use a bit more than just a race down. It doesn't ruin the track because of how great everything else is, but for a track to be number 1, there has to be no issues. Tick-Tock Clock is one of the most masterfully crafted and packed tracks in this game, and another stellar remake. Where do I begin? The clock theme and atmosphere, the moving hands to trick off of, the pendulums, the gears, the background machinery, everything! It needs no introduction. It's such a unique track and meets its fullest potential on how to design a Mario Kart track with an already engaging concept on paper. Take notes, other tracks. Just like Cheeseland, Ribbon Road is another Super Circuit remake that went out of its way to be as impressive as possible, even more so here. Cheeseland was more of a generalized cheese canyon, but this one is a literal child's playset in a bedroom, and I love big house themed tracks. This particular kind is real outside the box thinking. The original was already stellar for its wacky course theme, but this version puts an excellent modern spin to it. They convert a literal ribbon road to a toy set with 3 particular sections, and added some elements such as Mecha Koopas, Koopa Clowns, and waves to trick off of, while one particular section keeps the original's difficulty curve. Also, that remix is one of the best songs in the entire game. I don't care if it sounds completely different from the original, it raises the track's stakes even more. It's so good, it deserves to be in the top 3. And in number 2, we have a less commonly used house track, this time being a giant bathroom, Squeaky Clean Sprint, and is more unique and out of this world than Ribbon Road. Out of all the tracks that contain split paths, these are the best ones inserted into here. There's also a giant bathtub with a sponge to jump off, a drain pipe pushing you forward, some cloth to jump off of, a fan blowing at you, and a toilet bursting in laps 2 and 3. It once again excels at style and substance. I already said I love big house themed tracks, and this is no exception. It's so good, it barely misses out on number 1. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. My most favorite track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is Wii DK Summit. This is my favorite track in all of Mario Kart. My absolute GOAT. I had my most nostalgia for this track and Maple Treeway when I grew up with Mario Kart Wii. However, I always stuck with this track more. DK Summit is, in my opinion, the most developed, packed, substantial, versatile, and constructive track I ever played. It's another snowy mountain track that has a snowboard section and represents DK. But unlike Mount Wario's ski section, this snowboard area is fully realized in potential and challenge. Not one section is empty nor drags on a bit. There's the big cannon that shoots you to the other side of the cross before you end up snowboarding down the mountain, doing jump boosts and half pipes, tricking off of satisfying areas that aren't out of place, avoiding snow patches, drifting around the 2 big holes, and dodging snowboarding shy guys. Also, that extreme music is so friggin' good and further exemplifies this experience. Not only is it another challenging and fun track, but it has more personality than any other Mario Kart track. It makes you feel like you're snowboarding in a literal racing game, and that adds another perspective to it. It also gives off a feeling you don't get in racing games, and I absolutely love it. While Mount Wario had a more mountainous aspect as it feels like an adventure and had more substance, this one had even more consistency and soul, and is generally more addicting. It has been my favorite for a very long time, and it might stay this way forever. And that concludes my Mario Kart 8 Deluxe ranking on all 96 tracks. As you can see, this has been a pretty long video, surpassing 1 hour and 20 minutes. But with a Mario Kart game this big, it's understandable why. And yes, there have been longer videos on ranking 96 tracks in this game, with one particular video being 2.5 hours long. And I really didn't want my video to be that big. I figured this length would be more reasonable, as it's enough time to cover exactly what I need and still be quick about it. As for the courses, I covered in short times. I did go on about some, but those ones were more warranted to stretch my commentary. But otherwise, I didn't want to overbloat my video. I also had lots of time to think before actually making this video. Besides the length and commentary, I had several of my opinions shifting. I regularly commented on Mario Kart videos, let alone rankings, and even ranked my own courses, but had some of the most inconsistent choices to come up with before even fully understanding what makes quality. If I made this ranking back in 2023 or even 2024, this list not only would have been far more controversial, but it wouldn't even make sense, and would be considered a bad list even by controversial standards. But after enough time to think, I figured early 2026 would be the perfect time, and I hope this list will hold up for a good long time. After playing enough of this game, it might not change that much anymore. With all that said, I plan to rank all 30 tracks in Mario Kart World, and I plan to upload upload it soon, but have no exact date planned. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this ranking, and would like to hear in the comments how you would rank these courses. And I know this list will be somewhat controversial, but I hope it's not too much of so. Otherwise, stay tuned for more content, and I will see you in the next video.